Hey guys, got the dogs here, and I want to do a video on setting up the AVR. Now, I'm going to give you guys, basically a walkthrough on how I set up my AVR, and it's not necessarily the right way. It's just a way. It's the way I prefer. When it comes to this stuff, there is no right and wrong. So I'm going to just kind of go through it and tell you what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, to give you an idea of what's going on in my room, what I'm doing. And again, this may not be the right way for you. This may not be the right way in general, but it's the way I enjoy it the most. And this is on a Denon X6200, and I've run the room EQ for a different situation. Okay, so I ran this for having these subs back behind me and having these subs where these subs are. So in a wireless configuration to boot. So it's going to be a little bit wonky, but I'm going to show you what I'm kind of going through anyway. But I just want to point that out because you're going to see some measurements that are going to be like, wait, what? That doesn't look right. And that's why, because I haven't run the new room setup yet. But I wanted to show you some different things and different tricks you can do. All right, so I'm going to get into it. I'm going to zoom into the screen here and get started here. All right, so essentially what you're going to do is when you first hook up your AVR, you're going to go and you're going to let it do its updates and things like that. This one happens to connect wirelessly. My other AVR did not. It was an X2000. It did not connect wirelessly, so I never actually ran an update on that AVR. But this is a 9.2 channel receiver, and so it's a little bit different, and a little bit different than the one I ran before. But essentially what you're going to do, go into the speakers and you're going to run the Odyssey setup, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to start it, and then you're going to follow all the instructions, set up the tripod, you're going to plug in the mic and go through all the different things. Now, one of the things it's going to go through is it's going to try and get your sub to be leveled. At least this particular setup will. This has the sub EQ on it. But what that is real helpful for when you're running through it is that it'll go through and measure the sub. Now, if you're running two subs, what you want to do is you want to have each sub dial set up to a particular thing, set up to a particular zone, say 50%, and then you measure that sub in your main listening position, and then you go to the next sub and try and get it matched up. I've tried running it to where it says to run it, and I like to run it a little bit higher, but essentially you just kind of roll through it. And then when you actually do your measurements, you don't want your measurements to be really spread out. So where you're sampling the microphone, if say you've got your main listening position and then it says to move to the next spot, you don't want to move it across the room. You want to keep it real close by. The idea that you can get the room perfectly set up for one spot and then 15 feet across the room and have it perfectly matched, there's just no way. You want to get it set up in a kind of centralized zone. And then once you do that, it generally sounds pretty good in most other positions. And so I try and stick to what the what the Odyssey or whatever the room correction says to do. But that's one of those things that you don't want to just spread it way out. I tried doing that before, and I got kind of mixed results. When I grouped all of the measurements real close together, as though I just had one small couch right there instead of my lazy boy, it came out better. I liked it when I grouped them all together rather than spreading them out. So that's one of those things. And another tip too is that when it's going around the room and it's taking all the measurements, and I don't think it really matters whether it's Odyssey or another program, if it's not measuring all subs together, so if you're running 2 subs, 4 subs, whatever, if it's not measuring all of the subs together, you're probably not going to get the best results. You want to be able to measure all of the subs at once. And quite frankly, I'd like to see them take a general measurement with all speakers on together. Because your towers and all this other stuff, they all interact. And, that's getting more advanced into it. But I'd like to see a global tone to where it goes through all of the speakers all at once. And that's kind of complicated, but I'll move on. Sorry about that, getting off on a tangent. But anyway, so let's just assume you run through it and it's going to make these corrections for you. And what I'm going to do is mimic that. And so in the Odyssey setup, let's say you make some adjustments and you've kind of mucked things up. What you're going to have here is you've got your results. So the speaker configuration is set up like this. And you'll notice my fronts are large. That's not necessarily the way I run them. I run them as small. So I always have to go back in and fix that. But we'll go down here and you can see the crossovers. The crossovers are all set individually, you know, and so anyway, if you muck things up, things get just, you're adjusting things and everything's just kind of off. What you can do is go back to restore. Now this is going to change all the settings I've already done to my amplifier. And so all the tweaking I'm going to show you, this is going to wipe all that out and restore it just as though Odyssey just ran. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. It's going to restore it. All right, so now I've got everything back to where Odyssey set it. Now I go into the manual setup because I don't like it exactly the way Odyssey sets it up. So we're going to go into here and we're going to look at speaker configuration first. Now speaker configuration, it's got my front set as large, which, you know, these are definitely, you know, good towers. These are the SVS Prime towers, and they'll go down to about 32 hertz. So it sets them at large. Problem is, I still want those bass managed. I still want the signal that goes from those towers to be diverted to the subwoofers, and they'll still get a good amount of signal below that crossover, but it's not going to be taxing the amp so hard. And you know, your subwoofer is going to be much better at producing the lower frequencies than the towers. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to small. All right, and so we'll go back, and then we have distances. Distances, this is another tip of mine. Now, again, I was talking to you about it before. This was using the wireless setup, and you'll see subwoofer 2 is set at 36 feet. That was for the subs that were back behind or right next to me. And because they were wireless, it shows as 36 feet. If they weren't wireless and they were hardwired, that would probably show about 3 or 4 feet, or probably more like 6 feet, because there is some a little bit of delay from the DSP that these subs have. The 16-foot setting on these, the actual distance is about 12. So you get, with a combination of the DSP processing and the downward firing sub, it shows it as 16.3 feet, where really it's more like, you know, 12 and a half. And interesting to note, the PB2000, which is a forward-facing sub, that shows is about 15.5. So you can see a little bit of difference from a down-firing sub versus a forward-firing sub. So what I'm going to do, one thing I want to demonstrate too, this amplifier as well as the Marantz amplifier, if you just come in here and look at these, and then you say, oh, okay, I don't want it, and you back out, it says speaker distances are not valid. Please set them again. And then it sets it down to 26 feet. Kind of a problem when you're trying to run wireless. It won't let you set it to the proper distance. So that was an issue that I came up with. Not a major one, but it was definitely an issue. It definitely limited things, because what I like to do is I like to set my subs, I like to add about 4 to 5 feet to the distance. And what I find with that is I get a little bit better in-room response. And so because all these subs are pretty much the same distance, actually my subwoofer 1 is a little bit further, so I'm going to make that 21 feet. So by doing that, I get a little bit better response, and I get a little bit less of a problem where the crossover sits, which is, you know, right around 80 hertz usually. But anyway, I just find that being able to add that extra couple feet to whatever room correction sees it at just kind of helps things. I don't know, I get a little bit smoother response out of it by doing that. And then everything else is probably going to be about spot on. So anyway, so we'll go back out of this. So we got our distances set. And then we come down to levels. And you start your test tone, okay? And so you run through and check everything. Now, what I like to do is I like to use my microphone. Let me grab that for you. And so this microphone is the UMIC-1 made by Mini DSP. And so what I like to do is set this in my main listening position, okay, and then go through and verify that I'm getting roughly the same signal at my main listening position. Most of the time, Odyssey gets it pretty right, but sometimes I have to make little adjustments. It might be worth it. And sometimes what's right, even using this thing, isn't exactly what I want. So that's an interesting thing to check out. So anyway, I'll go through and I'll check all of these distances. And again, because of my wonky situation with the wireless subs and stuff like that, I had a different setup between Subwoofer 1 and Subwoofer 2. It's got one subwoofer at -9, one at -12. So for my purposes, again, I'm setting this up for this situation right now. I'm going to dial that back up to 9. Okay. All right, so those are the test tones. And then you got the crossovers. Now the crossovers is something that, you know, it's going to set it up to what the speakers are capable of, not what they're best at dynamically. If they were setting them up what they're best for dynamically, I think they would run them up to about 60 or 80 hertz versus 40. So with the front, I'm going to go ahead and dial those up. I actually like setting it at 90. That's my happy place. I don't know why. It's just where I happen to prefer them. It's giving about 90 hertz. From 0 to 90 hertz is going to the subwoofer, and then it tapers off. So I'm giving the subwoofer plenty to work with. If I left it at 40, I'm only giving the subwoofer about 20 hertz, or 25 hertz of usable signal. The rest gets filtered off. So that's not giving your subwoofers much to work with. I like to feed my subwoofers, give them plenty of signals so that they can really stretch their legs. And so I bumped this up to about 90, about the same for the center. And then with the surrounds, these are the prime satellites and the elevation speakers. So I'm going to bump those up to about 110. That's just where I happen to like it. Now they'll handle an 80 hertz crossover just fine. But again, I like to assign more of that power to the subwoofers. I let the subwoofers take more of that power rather than directing it to the smaller speakers. And that's another trick too, is if you've got an amplifier that maybe isn't too powerful and you feel like you're stressing it out a little bit, you can bump up the crossover, and it actually gives the amp a little more usable power, because as you go down in frequency, the more power is needed to produce the same signal. So again, that's just kind of a little trick I know of, but I'm going to go ahead and bump these up to 110, and that will send everything that's under 110 to the subwoofers, and everything above that will go to the speakers. But again, even the satellite speakers will get frequencies under 110. They'll get it all the way down to 20 hertz. It's just going to be less. It's just tapered off a lot more, so it's not using as much of the amplifier power to power those. All right, so that's the way I set it up. Big speakers, I set it about 80 to 90 hertz. Little speakers, I set it about 100 to 120 hertz. If they're really tiny speakers, I'll bump them all the way up to 150. So that's just one of those things that I would do. But that's the way I set up my crossovers. Okay. Now down here in the bass settings, this may be a little controversial what I do, but this is what I do. I use the LFE plus main setting. Now, the LFE plus main setting is virtually not in use with the small setting. And so, because I have them set at small, it doesn't do anything. I could just set it up to LFE and it'd be just fine. The difference is if I ever set the fronts to large, the signal will still go to the subwoofers in that case. But I don't recommend setting the speakers to large under any circumstances unless you're running a massive power amp and no subwoofers. Again, there are some speakers that will handle it. They're massive, they're really expensive, but really I bass manage every channel, and that's what small and large means, is you're bass managing it. Small is bass managed, large is not. So I'm going to do LFE plus main. Low pass filter for LFE. This is normally recommended to be set at 120. I found that setting it at 200 hertz just gives it the room a little bit more fullness. Not dramatic, not anything major, but just a smidge, and it doesn't seem to affect performance otherwise. It's just one of those things I do. It may be wrong. It may not be the right way to go, but that's just what I do. So anyway, those are the settings that I set up normally. Now I'm going to go into the audio input, okay? So the first thing is subwoofer level adjust. Now, as you can see, it's got my subs set at negative 10.5 and negative 7.0. Now, what I'll usually do is set these down maybe a little bit further, maybe down to, maybe down to 12, and then, dang it, sorry guys. All right, so set this down to 12, and then I'll put on something like Norah Jones or something that's got a good range of music all the way through. So it's not just a bass track. It's got other elements to it. It's got high notes, it's got low notes. And then I'll just slowly, in this situation, just dial up each sub until I feel the music is nice and filled in, okay? You overdrive the bass, particularly with powerful subs, and it gets noticeable, and it's, you know, at some point you get to develop an ear for it. But I just slowly dial it up until I'm at a comfortable place. And for me, in this particular setup, it happens to be between 7.5 and 6.5. That's just this particular setup. So that's what I do, is I dial it up slowly and get it to where it's just where I want it. And then sometimes I'll dial it up a little bit more because I'm in the process of setting everything up, and then I'll hear other stuff and I'll be like, okay, it's too loud, and I'll turn it down a little bit. So anyway, so that's what I do with the subwoofer level adjust. And then one more thing is the Odyssey. I like to set this at flat. I don't know why, that's just my favorite setting. You can leave it on reference. You can turn it off. It doesn't matter. It's whatever sounds best to you. I like having the dynamic EQ on. It makes it to where at lower levels you still get a fair amount of volume, but I do not like dynamic volume. I don't like what that does for the sound. It seems artificial to me. I'm not a big fan of it. Also, the Odyssey low filter containment, or low frequency containment, I did a measurement on this, and just on level 1, on a graph it looks like you don't have any subwoofer at all. So for you guys in apartments, that might be a thing to use, particularly late at night. And it goes all the way up to 7. So it will definitely contain the low frequencies, I'll tell you that. But for me, it was just too strong. So I usually leave that off. And I'm doing another video on apartments, and so you guys can check that out. One of the tricks is turning down the gain on the subwoofer and then adjusting everything back up. And what I mean by that is, let's say I've got the subwoofer gain at 50% right now. If I turn it down to 15% and then turn these up to, in my case, it was about 0. Okay, in that case, I measured the bleed over in the garage just to see what it would be like in a shared wall environment. And by turning the gain way down, and then on the subwoofer themselves, on the dial on the back of the subs, and then turning this part up, I was able to reduce the bleed over in the next room by 6 to 7 dB measured on a microphone. And so what that did for me is it gave me less dynamics, but I still had all of the depth. So I still had the benefits of the subwoofer, just not as much was leaking over into the garage. So is that going to be a perfect translation for you guys in apartments? Maybe not. But in my case, I was able to show an actual result. And yeah, I definitely like having the sub gain turned all the way up to 50%. But for you guys in apartments, I feel your pain. So that's just a trick I've learned on that. But I'm going to get these set up back to where I want them. But anyway, so that's kind of what I do in my situation. Now, there's all kinds of other different things you can mess around with, sound parameters, restorers, all this stuff. With the restorer, I don't know, it's interesting anyway. There's definitely an effect, but you got to listen for what that effect is. And one way you can do that is just close your eyes, switch through, and see what you like the best based on having your eyes closed. That's just one idea, but for me, I leave it off. I just kind of like the way things are sitting. But anyway, that's the way I set up my AVR as far as getting the speakers and crossovers and all that stuff set up. But hopefully that'll help you guys. It's, again, it may not be correct necessarily according to the experts and all that stuff, but that's where I like it. That's where I enjoy my system the most. You know, I guess the big takeaway is don't trust Odyssey, don't trust any room correction. Always go back in and check everything manually. And again, unless you're running a set of, you know, $5,000 speakers that will definitely go down to 20 hertz with ultimate dynamics, probably bass manage it and set all the speakers to small. Those are my two big takeaways. And also, you know, give your subs plenty of crossover. You know, I always do at least 80 hertz or higher, and let the subwoofers handle all of that heavy lifting. So anyway, guys, that's my setup. Hopefully that helps you. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. And I know it was a long video, but it's kind of involved. But hopefully that helps some of you get set up. If you have questions about my setup or why I do certain things, feel free. That's what I'm here for, and I'm having fun with this channel. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and please subscribe.